There are gifts that make us smile, and there are gifts that make us question everything we once believed. I still remember my 61st birthday. My daughter gave me a hand-drawn card, and my neighbor, Mrs. Ruth, brought over a warm apple pie. Happiness sometimes comes from the simplest things. But for Mrs. Marlene, that birthday began with a box of cookies, and ended with a confession that broke her heart beyond repair. I'm Lynn, and today, I want to tell you a story. About a mother, a cookie tin, and a son she once loved more than life itself. If you've ever felt that something wasn't quite right, but couldn't find the words to explain it, then maybe, just maybe, this story is for you. You know, 63 doesn't really feel like anything. It's not a milestone. It's not a round number. It just sounds tired that morning. She spent it the way she always did. Black coffee, the crossword, the creak of the porch swing underneath her, and that same patch of lawn that refused to stay green. No matter how much she watered it, it was quiet. Comfortable, in that lonely kind of way you eventually get used to. When someone you love stops speaking to you. That someone was Ezra. Then came the knock, not the impatient tap of the mailman. Not the neighbor kid selling coupons, just one knock. And the sound of footsteps. Retreating, she opened the door, and there it was, a box. Wrapped in plain brown paper. Carefully taped. A thin blue ribbon tied just once around the middle, and there was no mistaking that handwriting. She hadn't seen it in 3 years. But she would have known it with her eyes closed. Ezra wrote like a blueprint, precise. No wasted curves. Always in blue ink. She didn't open the box right away. She just stood there, barefoot on the doormat, staring at those neat letters spelling out her name. Marlene Greaves. She whispered it under her breath. Like maybe it might sound different somehow, coming from him back inside. She set the package down on the kitchen table. The coffee had gone cold. She reheated it, sat down, folded her hands in her lap. Like she was waiting to be called on 3 years of silence. Not even a card when she had pneumonia. Not a single word when her sister passed away, and now, this, eventually. Curiosity won. Inside the brown paper was a white box. And inside that, nestled in tissue like they were something fragile, were cookies, dozens of them carefully iced. Each one different blue flowers, golden leaves, stars dusted with sugar, all handmade. Ezra had never baked a day in his life. There was no letter. Just a small card, taped to the inside of the lid. Happy birthday, Mom. Let's start over. She held the card like it might vanish if she blinked. Her throat tightened. Not quite a lump, just that soft ache that creeps in when you want something to be real, but don't trust it yet. She didn't eat the cookies she wanted to. But she didn't. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was something quieter, something she couldn't name, but didn't want to ignore. She slipped one cookie into a small Tupperware container, sealed it, and placed it in the fridge. The rest, she wrapped carefully. Ruth Langford lived just 15 minutes away. Ezra's mother-in-law. Marlene told me she'd always been kind to her, especially during those times when Ezra grew distant and cold. So when the cookies arrived, she didn't really know what to do with them. But she figured, if anyone deserved a small kindness, it was Ruth. And maybe, just maybe, it felt easier to give the cookies away than to sit there wondering what they meant. That afternoon, Marlene got in her car and drove over. The sun was already starting to dip, casting that soft orange light through the trees. The kind of light that makes wind chimes dance and everything feel slower. Ruth's wind chimes were already tinkling when Marlene walked up to the door. She handed over the box with a smile, brushing off Ruth's protests like it was nothing. Later that evening, back at home, Marlene stood in the doorway of her kitchen. There was an empty patch on the table where the box had been. And she tried not to feel relieved that it was gone. The next morning came like any other. She was halfway through pouring her second cup of coffee when the phone rang. The sound made her flinch. It had been a long time since anyone called her that early. And even longer since that number appeared on her screen. Ezra. She didn't answer right away. Her hand hovered over the phone like it might burn her. It rang again, and only then did she pick up. Hello? Hi. Mom. His voice, smooth, casual, like 3 years of silence hadn't settled between them. Like nothing had happened. Happy birthday, he said, a little too light, a little late. I know. Marlene sat down. Slowly, she gripped the warm mug with both hands like an anchor. I got your package. She said. Yeah, Ezra replied, letting out a soft chuckle. Wasn't sure you would. There was a pause. And then, I wasn't sure you'd open it. Honestly, I did, she said. It was unexpected. Another pause. Then Ezra asked, just a little too casually. So, how were they? The cookies? Yeah, Marlene took a breath. Oh, I didn't eat them. I gave them to Ruth. There was silence. Long and sharp, she pulled the phone away from her ear, thinking maybe the call had dropped. But no, he was still there. You gave them to Ruth? His voice was different now. Tighter. The warmth was gone, replaced by something sharper. Yes, she said, slowly. She's always loved sweets. And I didn't know what to do with them. The line stayed quiet. She could hear him breathing, but it had changed. Shallow, uneven, then, building from under his breath, came the words. You did what? They landed like a blow. Marlene blinked. Stunned. Ezra, what's wrong? They weren't for her. He snapped. They were for you. Only you. His voice cracked, but not with sadness. With something else. Frustration. Panic. Maybe even rage. She didn't know what to say. I didn't know. She whispered. Right. He said. Bitter now. Of course you didn't. You never do. And just like that. He hung up. The dial tone hummed in her ear. She set the phone down carefully. Her hands suddenly cold. Only you. That's what he'd said. She stood and walked to the fridge. Opened it. Inside, still sitting in its little container, was one perfect cookie. Untouched, she shut the door and leaned against the counter. The cold from the fridge pressing against her spine. That's when the other phone rang, the landline in the hallway. A sound she hadn't heard in ages. No one really used it anymore. She walked toward it. Dread already spreading like ink in water when she picked it up. The receiver crackled, like it had forgotten how to carry a voice. Marlene, it was Lea. Ezra's wife. Yes? Her voice sounded thin, tight, brittle. It's Ruth, she said. She's in the hospital. Marlene sat down without meaning to. What happened? She collapsed this morning. Lea said, vomiting, disoriented. At first, I thought it was the flu. But it got worse. She couldn't stand. She was confused. Marlene's mouth went dry. The says they can't find anything definitive. They're running more tests. Then, after a pause, did she eat anything unusual? There was a long silence before Marlene answered. She mentioned cookies, said you brought them over. I did. Marlene said quietly. I gave her the box Ezra sent me. Lea didn't respond right away. In the background, Marlene could hear it. Hospital sounds. Machines. Footsteps. A cart rolling by. Do you think they could have made her sick? Lea finally asked. I don't know. Marlene whispered. I didn't eat any myself. Another long pause. If you think of anything. Lea said, her voice softer now. Anything at all. You'll tell me? Yes. Marlene whispered. Of course. I remember what Marlene told me about that day. After she hung up the phone, she just sat there, still, quiet, staring at the wall. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving her living room in that kind of dull gray that doesn't ask for lights. She didn't move, didn't speak. She let the silence stretch until it folded into the night. Later, maybe out of habit or something deeper, something like instinct, she wandered into the kitchen. Not because she was hungry, but because her body needed to do something familiar. She wiped down counters, folded towels that didn't need folding, moved like someone trying to restore order in a world that had gone out of balance. And that's when she saw it. She opened the trash to empty it and noticed something near the bottom. A small plastic bottle, clear, like the kind that holds vitamins. No label, just a faint dusting of white powder clinging to the inside. She picked it up, turned it in her hands. It wasn't hers. She was sure of that cap still screwed on tight. Then she opened the fridge and there it was, the cookie. Still in its little container. Still waiting. Her hands trembled when she lifted it out. She hadn't remembered saving it. Maybe she thought she'd want something sweet for later. A small moment of kindness for herself. But now she couldn't even look at it without feeling sick. She carried both, the cookie and the bottle, into the study and set them down on the desk in the soft glow of the desk lamp. The sugar crystals on the cookie sparkled faintly. She sat there, folded her hands, just stared. Was it meant for her? The question hung there, too big to touch before going to bed. She made a phone call to Janelle Maroro. A woman who worked in a local lab and owed her a quiet favor. She didn't explain much. Just said she needed something tested. Janelle agreed to meet her in the morning, and when Marlene hung up, she just stood in the middle of the room, holding herself still in the dark. She could still hear Ezra's voice in her head. You did what? The cookie stayed in the fridge that night. So did the dread the next morning. Marlene drove out to a lab tucked behind one of those medical office parks on the edge of town. You know the kind, quiet, easy to miss if you're not looking for it. Janelle met her in the parking lot. Her lab coat was too crisp for how early it was. She didn't ask many questions, just raised an eyebrow when Marlene handed her the container. This the kind of favor I'll regret? She asked. Light as she could, Marlene tried to smile. Couldn't quite land it. Just tell me what's in it. Janelle nodded once and disappeared through a side door. Marlene stayed in her car. Engine running, radio off. Her hands were cold, and she couldn't drive away. She just sat there, thinking. Memories crept in. Uninvited Ezra at 8. Folding napkins with perfect corners. Ezra at 10. Throwing a tantrum because she'd rearranged the pantry by color instead of size. Ezra at 12. Giving her the silent treatment for a full week because she'd used the wrong brand of ketchup on his sandwich back then. She told herself they were just quirks, that he was sensitive, particular, brilliant in school, obedient in public, a model child, at least on paper. But then there were those other things, the way he watched people eat. Watched her that time she accidentally used walnuts in the cookies. He spit it into the trash, then scrubbed his mouth until his lips bled, and the way he went still when he was disappointed. Not angry, not sad, just still, like he was storing that feeling away, saving it for something around mid-morning. The hospital called. A nurse. Ruth still wasn't improving. They were escalating her case to internal medicine. No diagnosis yet, and no one had mentioned the cookie. Marlene didn't either. She sat in the kitchen, holding a cup of tea she never drank. The mug went cold in her hands. The house creaked around her like it had something to say. Ezra had never been the kind of kid to explode. He waited. He stored things. He remembered you could almost see him filing moments away, every slight, every rule broken, and bringing them back sharper when the phone rang just after noon. She jumped. It was Janelle. We ran the standard panels, she said. Then I had them go deeper. Marlene held her breath. There's something in the cookie, Janelle said. Traces of a compound related to aconitum, monk's hood. Marlene had just learned the truth. It's highly toxic, rare to find in food. Definitely not an accident, the toxicologist had said. She closed her eyes, trying to breathe. The specialist had asked if someone had eaten the cookies. Marlene couldn't bring herself to answer. The woman hesitated, then said she'd write it up quietly when they hung up. Marlene didn't move. She sat still, her breath shallow, the silence growing louder around her. Her son had sent her poison in a gift box. A box she'd passed along to her neighbor like it was nothing. That thought echoed again and again. Poison, in a ribbon-wrapped box. Later that evening, she stepped outside. The wind tugged gently at her sweater as she paced along the front walkway. Unsure what she was even looking for. The sun was disappearing behind the trees. The breeze smelled faintly of cinnamon, or maybe it was just memory playing tricks on her. Then her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She answered. A calm, clipped, unfamiliar voice spoke. This is Detective Fallon Reyes. Are you Marlene Greaves? She paused, then said yes. The detective explained. He'd been referred by Dr. Janelle Maroro. She had requested toxicology testing on the food item, and had asked that any concerning findings be shared with the authorities. Was that correct? Marlene wanted to lie, to say no, to pretend it was all a misunderstanding, to protect whatever broken pieces were left of what once was her family. But instead, she heard herself say, yes, that's correct. There was a pause on the line. Professional, but not cold. Reyes asked, would you be willing to meet to discuss the results and your concerns? She agreed. But to her, it felt like signing a contract she couldn't take back. They met that afternoon in a small, quiet office tucked behind the police station. There was nothing dramatic about it. Reyes looked young for a detective, maybe mid-30s. Sharp eyes that kept moving, like he was used to reading people. He offered her water. She declined. Her hands were already too busy, folding and unfolding a tissue she hadn't even realized she was holding. He began gently. asking her how long she'd been estranged from Ezra, how often they spoke, when she received the package, what was in it, how Ruth Langford ended up involved. Marlene answered plainly, carefully, trying to keep emotion from creeping into her voice. Reyes listened without interrupting, taking notes in tight handwriting on a yellow legal pad. Then he asked the question she'd been dreading. Do you believe your son meant to harm you? Marlene looked down at her hands. I don't want to believe it, she said, but the cookie had poison in it. Ruth didn't bake it. I didn't bake it. He sent it. She mentioned the bottle in the trash. It wasn't hers. The timing all fit. Any reason he'd want to harm you? Reyes asked. Financial motive? Family tension? She flinched. He resents me. Always has. I think. Blames me for things I couldn't fix. Reyes nodded slightly. But Marlene could see the doubt. The uncertainty swimming behind his steady gaze. All she had was a poisoned cookie and a gut feeling. No fingerprints. No witnesses. No confession. Then he leaned in. Would you be willing to submit the cookie and the bottle as evidence? Let us open a formal case. Marlene hesitated. It felt like betrayal, even though she knew Ezra had made the first move. Even though deep down, she understood this wasn't something she could ignore. Finally, she said it. Yes, if there's any chance he's done this before or would do it again. I can't ignore that. Reyes stood, signaling the end of the meeting. We'll log the items and keep you informed. If anything changes, please call me directly. She walked out of the station just as the sky began to darken. Got into her car, locked the doors by instinct, and sat, her hands frozen on the steering wheel. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was older than that. Deeper, a realization that motherhood didn't stop just because your child changed. The part of her that once packed school lunches, wrote notes in pencil, folded tiny socks, that part now sat quiet, stunned, trying to make sense of how the boy she raised had become the man who sent her a box of poison tied in ribbon that night. Marlene didn't sleep. She left the hallway light on. Every floorboard creak made her sit up. Alert by morning, she had made a decision. If Ezra didn't want her to find out what he was capable of, he should have been more careful. She would go see him, not as his mother, but as the woman he underestimated, and she would bring a recorder. Ezra answered the door with a tight smile. The kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. He looked thinner than Marlene remembered, like something inside him had been slowly hollowing out. Mom, Ezra said, stepping aside. This is a surprise. She forced a smile. I heard about Ruth. She told him. I wanted to check in. See how she's doing. He nodded, gesturing her in. She's still at St. Luke's. Laya's with her. They think it's some kind of virus. Marlene nodded like she believed it. But the phone in her coat pocket was already recording. His kitchen was spotless as always, a place where everything had its place. Down to the angle of the knife block. She kept her tone light. I'm sorry we didn't get to talk more the other day, she said. The cookies were lovely. Ezra raised an eyebrow. Were they? She watched his face. I didn't try them, actually. Ruth was thrilled. She said the star-shaped one was her favorite. There it was. A flicker. Barely a pause, but enough. His eyes narrowed just for a second, and his voice softened. Ruth picked the stars. But Marlene hadn't said what shape Ruth had eaten, only that she'd liked one. Yes, she said slowly. She mentioned it. Ezra turned to the sink, rinsing a glass that didn't need washing. She always did go for anything pretty, always more concerned with aesthetics than what's underneath. She studied him. You never told me you'd started baking. He laughed. But it sounded wrong. New hobby. Good way to unwind. Where'd you learn to use monkshood? He froze. Not visibly, not dramatically, but something shifted in his spine. A stillness. He was deciding how to react. I don't know what that is, he said too quickly. Dr. Marrow does. Ezra turned, the glass still in his hand. You went to Janelle. She ran the test. It was in the cookie. Marlene. I don't know what you think you're doing, he said, setting the glass down with care. But accusations like that, they don't end well. Especially without proof. I think you've already given me enough, she said quietly. You slipped up. He stared at her for a long time. His face didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. A flicker of calculation. You've always misunderstood me, he said. No, she replied. I think I finally understand you completely. She reached for her purse, keeping her hand steady. Her heart was thudding so loudly. She was sure he could hear it. as she turned to leave. Her eyes landed on the counter behind him. There, partially obscured by a tea towel, was another small bottle. Identical in shape to the one she'd found in her trash. Ezra noticed her glance. He moved to block the counter casually. As if just stretching. I should go, she said. I've already taken up enough of your time. Give Ruth my best, he said. His voice was light again. Marlene stepped outside into the cold air. Every nerve in her body on alert. The phone in her coat pocket was still recording. She didn't stop it until she was back in her car, doors locked. Engine running. She sent the audio to Detective Reyes before she could change her mind, and then she drove straight to St. Luke's. Ruth was still unconscious. Laya sat beside her, eyes red. Marlene told her what she had to. Everything. By the time she left, the sun had gone down and the sky was heavy that night. She slept on the couch with the hallway light on and the phone beside her. She didn't close her eyes for more than a few minutes at a time. When it finally rang at 3:17 a.m., she didn't flinch. Detective Reyes called just after sunrise. The audio was enough. Coupled with the toxicology results in Ruth's medical report, it gave them the warrant they needed. Ezra was taken in before noon. Quiet, composed, like he'd rehearsed it. Marlene didn't go down to the station. There was nothing left to say. Ruth woke slowly over the next few days, confused, then grateful, then silent. Marlene sat with her when Laya couldn't. Ruth didn't ask for details, and Marlene didn't offer them. One afternoon, she took Ruth's hand and said, "I'm sorry." Ruth squeezed it once. That was enough. Laya cried in Marlene's kitchen later that week. She told me she should have known. That something in Ezra had shifted, had twisted. He'd grown distant in ways that felt odd, even for someone like him. She'd found strange notations in his journals. Jars of dried plants tucked away in his old room, unlabeled. Brittle, unfamiliar. Back then, she told herself he was just coping. With what? She wasn't sure. Maybe life. Maybe disappointment. But the truth had roots much deeper. Ezra had been writing under a false name, on obscure herbalist forums, of all places. For years, dozens of posts. Cold, clinical descriptions of chemical extractions, dosage trials, interactions between toxins and human systems. It was academic in tone, precise. But reading it now, she said, it made her skin crawl. Some of the terms matched exactly what had been found in Ruth's bloodwork, and in the end, everything spiraled back to one choice. One cookie. One cookie she hadn't eaten. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when she opened the fridge. I can almost picture her there, sunlight slipping through the blinds. The old refrigerator humming. The container sat on the middle shelf. The cookie inside was still intact, though the frosting had dulled to a pale, uninviting color. Detective Reyes had handed her a sealed evidence bag on the day Ezra was arrested, not for revenge, he'd said. For clarity, she slid the cookie into the bag, pressed the seal shut. Click. She told me it felt heavier than it should have. Not physically, maybe, but in meaning. That night, she cleaned out the hallway closet, found a small, fireproof box. She placed the cookie inside, then added the card that had come with the package. Happy birthday, Mom. Let's start over. She locked the box, put it on the highest shelf, not to forget, but to remember what she had almost missed. She stood alone in the kitchen for a long time after that. The house completely still, the air almost thick with silence. And then she turned off the light, walked slowly down the hallway, and told me, I don't know if I feel safe again, or if I ever really had. I've thought a lot about what Marlene shared with me that day, not just as someone who listens to stories, but as a mother, as someone who's had moments, small, flickering ones, when your heart whispers something isn't right, and you silence it, because love tells you to. Marlene's story isn't easy, but maybe it wasn't meant to be. Maybe it's just meant to wake us up if you've ever doubted your own instincts, or loved someone so deeply that it blinded you. Then I hope this story helped you feel less alone. This is Lynn, and thank you for spending time with me today. If Marlene's story moved you, or made you reflect on your own, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a review, or share this with someone who might need it. Sometimes, stories don't give us answers, but they give us the courage to ask better questions. Until next time, take care of your heart.